She was betrayed, lost her family, her wealth, and was abandoned at 75 years old in a secluded house, far away from the world. But within that house, she discovered something that would forever change her fate. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Marjorie had always been a bright and cheerful woman. At 75 years old, she found herself reflecting on a life filled with love, heartbreak, and unimaginable challenges. She had been married for nearly 50 years to Thomas, her soulmate. They met in their early 20s when Thomas, a young man with ambitious dreams, had just started working at his family's business. He came from a long line of successful entrepreneurs, and his family had high hopes for his future. Marjorie, on the other hand, came from a modest background. Her family lived on the outskirts of town, where her father worked as a mechanic and her mother as a schoolteacher. Though they were poor in material wealth, they were rich in love, and they raised Marjorie with strong values. Thomas's family, at first, had reservations about their relationship, unsure if Marjorie would fit into their world of wealth and prestige. But over time, they came to love her gentle spirit and determination, eventually welcoming her into their family with open arms. Despite their differences, Marjorie and Thomas's love grew stronger with each passing year. They married in a grand ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. It was a day that Marjorie often looked back on with fond memories, remembering the joy and celebration that had filled the air. The newlyweds were full of dreams for the future, and Marjorie, though she had a degree in education, decided to become a homemaker. She preferred the quiet satisfaction of caring for their home and future children over any career ambitions. The first few years of marriage were blissful, and Marjorie and Thomas looked forward to building a family together. However, despite their efforts, they were unable to have children. They consulted several doctors, but the news was always the same. Neither of them could conceive. The disappointment weighed heavily on Thomas, who had always dreamed of passing down his family legacy to a child. But Marjorie, ever the optimist, continued to support him through his frustration, reminding him that their love was strong enough to overcome any challenge. Thomas's close friend, Damon, played an increasingly important role in their lives during this difficult time. Damon had been a rising star in the legal world and had started working for Thomas's company just a few years after their marriage. He was a charismatic and ambitious man, and his charm quickly won over both Thomas and Marjorie. Over the years, Damon became more than just an employee. He became their closest confidant and advisor. Damon suggested that Marjorie and Thomas consider adoption. He knew how much they longed for a child and assured them that adoption could provide the family they had always dreamed of. Damon, who had connections in legal and governmental circles, promised to handle the entire process for them. Marjorie was touched by his generosity, and Thomas, despite his pride, began to warm to the idea of adoption. One fateful night, after attending a charity gala, Thomas and Marjorie were driving home when they noticed a young boy, drenched and shivering under a bridge. The rain poured heavily, and the boy looked frightened and alone. Marjorie, unable to bear the sight of his suffering, asked their driver to stop. She rushed to the boy's side and gently asked where his parents were. The boy, with tears in his eyes, told her that they had died in a tragic accident and that he had been living on the streets ever since. His name was Lucas, and he was only 10 years old. Thomas, moved by the boy's story, took off his coat and wrapped it around Lucas, offering him warmth and comfort. The couple decided to take him home with them, hoping to give him the love and care he had been deprived of for so long. With Damon's help, the adoption process was expedited, and soon Lucas became a permanent member of their family. Marjorie and Thomas showered him with affection, giving him everything a child could want: a safe home, good education, and unconditional love. However, Lucas was a quiet and introverted child. Despite his newfound security, he struggled to trust others and rarely made friends. He idolized Damon, who frequently visited their home and treated him like a younger brother. As the years passed, Lucas continued to grow closer to Damon, often seeking his approval and guidance more than his adoptive parents. By the time Marjorie and Thomas were in their 70s, Lucas had grown into a shy, introspective teenager. Damon, now in his mid-30s, had risen to become the vice president of Thomas's company, and he managed much of the business's day-to-day operations. Thomas, trusting Damon completely, had given him free rein to make major decisions. He had always considered Damon to be the son he never had, and in many ways, trusted him more than anyone else in his life. But Thomas's blind faith in Damon would soon prove to be his greatest mistake. One morning, while visiting the company, Thomas noticed that the atmosphere was unusually tense. The employees, normally cheerful and welcoming, seemed to avoid eye contact, speaking in hushed tones whenever he walked by. Thomas overheard snippets of conversations, mentioning salary cuts, increased workloads, and discontent among the staff. Confused, Thomas wondered why there was so much unrest. Damon had assured him that the company was thriving, so why were the employees so unhappy? Later that day, Thomas met with Damon in his office, where Damon reassured him that everything was under control. Damon handed him several documents, asking him to sign them. Trusting his longtime friend and advisor, Thomas signed the papers without a second glance. Unbeknownst to him, those documents would seal his fate. Days later, while watching the evening news with Marjorie, a shocking report aired. Thomas's company was facing public outrage due to mass layoffs, wage cuts, and poor working conditions. The report painted Thomas as a greedy, ruthless businessman, indifferent to the suffering of his employees. Damon, however, was portrayed as the hero, standing up for the workers and fighting to protect their rights. Thomas was in disbelief. He immediately called Damon, demanding an explanation, but Damon's response was chilling. "Thomas, you've signed everything over to me. The company, the house, everything is mine now. You have 90 days to vacate the property, or I'll have you removed by the authorities. This is business, and it's nothing personal." The shock of Damon's betrayal was too much for Thomas to bear. He had trusted Damon with his life's work, with his family, and now he had lost everything. In a desperate attempt to confront Damon, Thomas decided to drive to the office, bringing Lucas along for support. But before they could leave, Thomas collapsed, clutching his chest. The stress and heartbreak had taken its toll, and despite Marjorie's frantic efforts to revive him, Thomas passed away later that night from a heart attack. Thomas's sudden death left Marjorie and Lucas reeling. They didn't even have enough money to cover the cost of his funeral. Damon, ever the manipulator, publicly offered to pay for the funeral, presenting himself as the caring friend and benefactor. Few people attended the service, just Marjorie, Lucas, and a handful of close friends. When Marjorie and Lucas returned to their home after the funeral, they found an eviction notice waiting for them. Damon had moved swiftly, taking over all of Thomas's assets, including the family mansion. He had also manipulated Lucas's adoption records, making it appear as though he was Lucas's legal guardian. Damon threatened Lucas, telling him that if he didn't leave with him, Marjorie would be left penniless and homeless. Fearing for his mother, Lucas reluctantly agreed to go with Damon, leaving Marjorie alone and devastated. With no other options, Marjorie was forced to move to a small, decrepit house in a remote area, far from the life she had once known. She had lost her husband, her son, her home, and her wealth. She was completely abandoned, left to live out her days in isolation. However, even in her darkest moments, Marjorie found an unlikely source of comfort. Her nearest neighbor, Hazel, an elderly widow living on a meager pension, took pity on her and began visiting regularly. Hazel brought food and supplies, offering her companionship and support during her most difficult days. Despite her own struggles, Hazel never hesitated to share what little she had. Over time, Marjorie and Hazel formed a deep friendship, one that gave Marjorie the strength to carry on. Though the pain of losing her family never fully left her, she slowly began to find solace in the simple routines of daily life. One day, while cleaning out the attic of her dilapidated home, Marjorie stumbled upon an old, locked chest covered in dust. Intrigued, she searched for a way to open it, and after some effort, the rusted lock gave way. Inside the chest, Marjorie found a treasure trove of valuable jewelry, gold, and antiques, items that had been hidden away for generations. Alongside the valuables was a diary, written by Thomas's grandmother. The diary detailed how she had quietly amassed a fortune over the years, fearing that the family's wealth might one day be taken away. She had hidden the fortune in this very house, never revealing its location to anyone. As Marjorie read through the diary, she realized that the treasure now belonged to her. With this newfound wealth, she had the means to rebuild her life and reclaim what had been stolen from her. Meanwhile, Damon had grown arrogant in his success. He believed that Marjorie was out of the picture for good and that Lucas, now under his control, would pose no threat. Without Thomas's guiding hand, the company began to falter. Damon, unprepared for the intricacies of managing such a large business, made several poor decisions. The company's stock value plummeted, and to keep things afloat, Damon started selling off assets. What Damon didn't realize was that Marjorie, with her newfound fortune, had been quietly buying up shares of the company. With the help of financial advisors and legal experts, she strategically positioned herself as a major shareholder, preparing to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Every time Damon sold another portion of the company, Marjorie was there to snatch it up, slowly but surely regaining control. Damon, blinded by his ego, remained unaware of the silent takeover happening under his nose. He continued to portray himself as the savior of the company, but the reality was far different. The employees, once loyal to Thomas, grew increasingly disillusioned with Damon's leadership. Some began whispering about the possibility of new ownership, while others quietly resigned, unwilling to continue under Damon's harsh rule. Finally, the day came for the annual shareholder meeting. Damon entered the boardroom with his usual swagger, confident that he still had control despite the company's financial troubles. He had no idea that Marjorie had orchestrated a plan to reveal the truth and take him down once and for all. As the meeting began, Damon noticed an unusual buzz among the attendees. The atmosphere felt tense, as if something significant was about to happen. His suspicion grew when he saw several unfamiliar faces sitting at the table: lawyers, financial advisors, and representatives of major shareholders. Still, Damon brushed it off, convinced that he could manipulate the situation to his advantage, just as he had done with Thomas years ago. Suddenly, the doors to the boardroom swung open, and in walked Marjorie. She was no longer the grieving, broken woman Damon had abandoned. She was confident, poised, and determined. Dressed in an elegant yet understated suit, she exuded the quiet power of someone who had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. Damon's jaw dropped in disbelief as Marjorie took her place at the head of the table. The room fell silent as she calmly laid out her legal claim to the company. With meticulous documentation, she proved that she had been steadily buying up shares and now held the majority stake in the business. The stunned board members listened as Marjorie recounted Damon's betrayal, his manipulation of Lucas, and his illegal activities within the company. Damon tried to interrupt, but Marjorie silenced him with a single raised hand. "You've had your time, Damon," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Now it's time for justice to be served." The lawyers Marjorie had brought with her presented evidence of Damon's fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. They had everything they needed to strip Damon of his position and have him arrested. Damon, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to plead with Marjorie, but she was unmoved. The betrayal he had inflicted on her family was too great to forgive. As the meeting concluded, Marjorie was officially reinstated as the head of the company, and Damon was escorted out by security. The same people who had once admired him now turned their backs, unwilling to support a man who had built his success on lies and deception. In the weeks that followed, Marjorie worked tirelessly to rebuild the company. She met with the employees, restoring their confidence and assuring them that things would improve. She brought back many of Thomas's original policies, focusing on fairness, transparency, and integrity, values that had been lost under Damon's leadership. Lucas, now a young man, returned to his mother's side. Free from Damon's control, He finally opened up to Marjorie about his fears and insecurities. Together, they began the long process of healing from the trauma they had endured. Marjorie, who had once feared losing her son, now found strength in their bond, knowing that they would face the future together. Her loyal friend Hazel, who had stood by her during her darkest moments, became an integral part of Marjorie's new life. Grateful for her unwavering support, Marjorie offered Hazel a position as her personal assistant. Though Hazel was hesitant at first, not wanting to be a burden, Marjorie insisted, saying, "You helped me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to help you." Together, Marjorie, Lucas, and Hazel began a new chapter of their lives. The company, once teetering on the brink of collapse, thrived under Marjorie's leadership. She implemented new initiatives, expanded operations, and treated her employees with respect and fairness, just as Thomas had always intended. As the years went by, Marjorie's name became synonymous with resilience and determination. She had been betrayed, abandoned, and left to fend for herself at 75 years old, but she had risen above it all. In the quiet moments, as she sat in the office that had once belonged to her husband, she could feel his presence. Thomas had always believed in her strength, even when she didn't believe in it herself. Now, as she looked out over the company they had built together, she knew she had honored his legacy. And in the end, Marjorie had not only reclaimed her fortune and her family, but she had also rediscovered her own strength, the strength that had carried her through the darkest days of her life and brought her to a place of triumph and peace. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.